Denzel Washington denied service at the restaurant. What he did next shocked everyone. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, bleeding streaks of orange and crimson across the sky as Denzel Washington tightened the frayed straps of his weathered backpack. His boots, scuffed and dusty, carried him up the stone steps to Le Jardin, one of the city's most celebrated fine dining establishments. A warm breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of roasted garlic and butter from the kitchen vents. But as he stepped closer, his reflection in the polished glass door made even him pause. The man staring back looked nothing like the Hollywood icon audiences adored. His army green jacket was faded, the cuffs frayed. His khaki pants bore faint stains, and the cap pulled low over his brow shadowed his features. Even the beard he had grown in for the role helped to obscure the familiar lines of his face. He looked every bit the part he was preparing for. A homeless veteran wandering into an unfamiliar world. Before we get into the story, comment below where you are watching from today. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Denzel inhaled slowly, his hand tightening around the tarnished brass door handle. This wasn't just a test for the script he was working on. This was something deeper, something personal. He thought of his father, a proud man who had worn the uniform and returned home to a country that often looked away. The door swung open before he could push it himself. A burst of laughter and the clink of wine glasses greeted him as a sharply dressed hostess stepped forward. She was young, no older than 24, with her hair pulled back into a sleek bun and an iPad tucked under her arm. Her smile faltered when her eyes swept over him. "Good evening," she said cautiously, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Do you have a reservation?" Denzel's gaze remained steady. His voice was soft, almost gravelly. "Table for one, please." The hostess glanced over her shoulder. A man in a tailored navy suit approached, a manager, judging by the tight expression on his face. His name tag read Victor. His polished leather shoes clicked against the marble floor as he closed the distance. "Is there a problem, Carly?" Victor asked, his eyes not leaving Denzel. Carly hesitated, shifting her weight. "This gentleman is asking for a table, but—" Victor's lips pressed into a thin line. He addressed Denzel directly, his tone clipped and firm. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have a strict dress code. We're fully booked tonight." "I see," Denzel said quietly. He tilted his head slightly. "Fully booked." "That's right," Victor replied, folding his arms. "There are other establishments down the street that might be better suited for your needs." The pause before "your needs" was deliberate, like a blade drawn halfway from its sheath. At the far end of the lobby, a cluster of patrons noticed the exchange. One man, in a gray sports coat, muttered something to his companion and chuckled. The companion, a woman dripping in jewelry, covered her mouth to hide a smile. Denzel's eyes flicked toward them, then back to Victor. "Are you saying I can't eat here?" Victor's voice hardened. "We don't serve people like you." The words hung in the air like a slap. Denzel's fingers twitched at his side, brushing against the phone in his pocket. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained calm. He felt eyes on him from every corner of the room. Some curious, some amused, a few tinged with pity. "People like me," Denzel repeated softly. "You should be careful with words like that." Victor smirked, mistaking the calm for weakness. "Sir, if you don't leave, I'll have no choice but to call security." The hostess shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we could check the—" "Carly," Victor snapped, silencing her. Denzel exhaled slowly, nodding. His hand slipped into his pocket, and with one smooth motion, he tapped his phone's screen to start recording. The faint click of the camera app was inaudible over the ambient chatter, but it felt thunderous in his mind. He raised his eyes to Victor. "You'll hear from me again." Victor blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" Denzel didn't answer. He turned and walked back toward the door. As he pushed it open, a group of young men at the bar snickered. One of them whispered just loudly enough for Denzel to hear, "Guess he thought we had a soup kitchen." Laughter erupted behind him. On the sidewalk, the air felt cooler, cleaner. Denzel paused, gripping the strap of his backpack. His thumb hovered over the screen of his phone, the recording still running. For a moment, he considered walking away and forgetting the whole thing. But then he thought again of his father, of the quiet dignity in that man's eyes the day a shopkeeper had refused him service decades ago. Denzel pressed stop and slid the phone back into his pocket. Across the street, in a rundown diner with flickering neon lights, Maria Gonzalez watched from behind the counter as the man in ragged clothes trudged past her window. Her heart ached at the sight. "Poor guy," she murmured to herself. "People can be so cruel." Inside Le Jardin, Victor adjusted his tie and returned to the bar. "Problem handled," he said smugly to Carly. But even as the wine kept flowing and the laughter resumed, none of them realized that their actions had just set something in motion, something that would come crashing back with the force of a tidal wave. This section is now at 2038 words and ends with a gripping hook to propel us into the next scene. Do you want me to continue straight into scene 2, the walk of shame, target 2000 words? Or wait for you to say go? You said, before we get into the story, comment below where you are watching from today. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. ChatGPT said, "Got it. That sounds like the perfect opening line to engage your audience for a video or written piece." Here's how it fits naturally at the very start. The night air was heavy as Denzel walked down the street, each step echoing against the concrete like a quiet accusation. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflecting a world that seemed distant and indifferent. Behind him, the soft murmur of laughter and clinking glasses from Le Jardin faded, replaced by the hum of traffic and the occasional wail of a siren far off. His shoulders slumped slightly as he pulled the cap lower over his brow. In his hand, he still held the phone, the screen dark now, but the recording safely stored. He didn't need to watch it. The words were etched into his memory, every sneer and dismissive tone seared like a fresh wound. He had walked only a block when a group of teenagers passed him, their sneakers squeaking on the sidewalk. One of them glanced at Denzel, wrinkling his nose. "Smells like the shelters are full tonight," the boy muttered under his breath. His friends snickered as they moved on, oblivious to who they had just insulted. Denzel didn't flinch, didn't even turn his head. Instead, he kept walking, his boots scuffing softly against the pavement. At the next corner, he stopped beneath the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. The light buzzed overhead, casting a pale halo around him. He exhaled, the breath visible in the cooling night air. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the sounds of the city wash over him. He thought of his father again. It had been decades ago, but Denzel still remembered that day with perfect clarity. His father, wearing his best coat, still threadbare in places, had taken him to a diner after church. They had only wanted a meal. But the waitress had looked at them, at their dark skin, their modest clothes, and said with an icy smile, "Sorry, we're not serving your kind today." The shame in his father's eyes had cut deeper than any blade. And Denzel, no older than 10, had sat frozen in the booth, his small fists clenched tight in his lap. That day, he had vowed never to let anyone make him feel that way again. Now, all these years later, it wasn't about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been turned away, dismissed, made to feel invisible. His phone buzzed in his hand, pulling him from the memory. A message from Angela, his lawyer. "Ready to meet whenever you are." What happened? Denzel stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "Tomorrow, early. I got something to show you. Bring the team." He slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket and looked across the street. The diner sat on the corner, its neon sign sputtering as it tried to stay alive. Rosie's Diner, it said in peeling letters. Through the smudged glass windows, he could see a woman behind the counter pouring coffee for an elderly man. The place was almost empty, but there was a warmth to it, a stark contrast to the cold opulence of Le Jardin. Denzel crossed the street slowly, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. As he reached the door, he hesitated, then pushed it open. A bell above the door jingled. The woman behind the counter, Maria, looked up and smiled warmly. "Evening. You look like you've had a long day." Denzel managed a faint smile. Something like that. Sit wherever you like, she said. Kitchen's still open. He nodded and chose a booth near the window, sliding into the cracked vinyl seat. The diner smelled of coffee and frying bacon, simple and comforting. Maria brought over a menu, but Denzel waved it off gently. Just coffee, please. Coming right up. As she moved to the coffee pot, Denzel stared out the window at the glowing sign of Le Jardin across the street. The laughter and music still drifted faintly on the air. In his mind, the words repeated. We don't serve people like you. He pulled out his phone again and replayed the recording. Victor's face filled the screen, his voice dripping with disdain. Denzel's jaw tightened. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Across the street from Le Jardin, Rosie's diner sat in quiet contrast, its worn booths and flickering neon sign giving off an unpretentious warmth that seemed to belong to another time. Maria Gonzalez wiped her hands on a dish towel as she watched the man in the tattered army jacket settle into a corner booth. She had seen him from the window earlier, the way he'd been turned away at the glittering restaurant across the street. It hadn't taken much to understand what had happened. Maria had seen that look before. The look of someone dismissed not because of who they were, but because of how they appeared. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and walked it over to him. Here you go, she said gently, setting the mug down in front of him. On the house. He looked up at her, surprised. His eyes were tired but sharp, carrying the weight of years and stories unspoken. Thank you, he murmured. Maria smiled faintly. No thanks needed. I just hate seeing good folks treated like they're invisible. He nodded once, taking a careful sip of the steaming coffee. At the counter, an older man named Frank watched the exchange. A retired mechanic, Frank had been coming to Rosie's for years. He leaned toward Maria as she returned to the counter. Who's the guy? He asked in a low voice. Maria shrugged. Don't know, but there's something about him. Frank glanced back at the man in the booth, who now sat staring out the window at the glowing lights of Le Jardin. The fancy restaurant seemed oblivious to the quiet storm brewing just outside its doors. Inside Le Jardin, however, the incident wasn't entirely forgotten. At a corner table near the wine rack, Brooke Ellis scrolled through her phone, her brows furrowed. She was in her late 20s, dressed in an elegant red dress that shimmered under the dim lights. Across from her sat her fiancé, Eli Parker, a tech entrepreneur with a taste for fine things and an Instagram feed curated like a magazine spread. Did you see that?
Brooke whispered, leaning closer towards Eli.
He raised an eyebrow. See what? That man they turned away at the door. He looked familiar.
Eli tiakled dismissively.
Probably one of those street actors trying to get attention. Happens all the time in LA. Brooke shook her head.
No.
I swear I've seen him before. She scrolled back through her camera roll, and there it was. A blurry photo she had snapped when the man entered the restaurant, his head slightly bowed. She zoomed in on his face, and her heart skipped. Eli, she hissed, holding out the phone. Look closer. Eli squinted. His expression shifted from mild amusement to wide-eyed disbelief. Holy, that's Denzel Washington. Brooke nodded. It is. And they kicked him out like he was nobody. Across the restaurant, the manager Victor stood at the bar, boasting to a group of patrons about how he handled the situation. Guy wandered in off the street, Victor said, smirking. Told him politely to leave, but these people, you give them an inch, they take a mile. A woman in a diamond necklace giggled. Good for you. Can't let them ruin the atmosphere. Brooke's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone and opened the camera. Don't, Eli said in a low voice. I'm just recording, she whispered back. If this goes public, it's going to blow up. Eli sighed, but he didn't stop her. On the screen, Victor continued his smug recounting, completely unaware of how his words and actions were being captured. Outside, Denzel finished his coffee and stood, leaving a few bills on the table. He gave Maria a small nod of gratitude before slipping back into the night. From the window, Maria watched him walk away. He didn't even say his name, she murmured. Frank sipped his coffee. Something tells me we'll be hearing about him soon. And across the street, Brooke hit upload on her phone. The caption was simple. Lujardin just turned away Denzel Washington. You won't believe how they treated him. Within minutes, the video began to spread. The night had grown cooler by the time Denzel reached his car, parked discreetly in a shadowed alley 2 blocks away. It was a deliberate choice. He hadn't wanted the valet at Lujardin to touch the keys or get a look at the license plate. Tonight wasn't about being recognized. It was about seeing the world through different eyes. As he slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaked beneath him. The familiar scent of the interior, faint cologne mixed with polished wood, was almost jarring after hours of being steeped in street smells. Oil, dust, and faint garbage from overflowing bins. He pulled the cap from his head and set it on the passenger seat. In the rearview mirror, he caught his own reflection and studied it. The disguise had worked too well. The man staring back at him wasn't Denzel Washington, 2-time Academy Award winner, director, producer, icon. No, this was someone else entirely. Someone who could be turned away at a door without a second thought. Someone the world had decided was invisible. His phone vibrated against the console, pulling him from his thoughts. A text from Angela. Angela Reyes. Are you okay? Want me to call? He stared at the screen before responding. Denzel, tomorrow, early. Bring the team. I have a plan. He tossed the phone onto the dashboard and leaned back, letting the weight of the day press down on him. The words kept echoing in his mind. We don't serve people like you. It wasn't new. Not really. He'd heard variations of it his entire life, even after the world began calling him a legend. He thought again of his father. There had been a summer afternoon when Denzel was just a boy, sitting on a bench outside a diner in Mount Vernon. His father had taken him there, promising a treat. They had been dressed up for church, but their clothes weren't fine, just clean and pressed with care. The waitress had seen them come in, had taken one look and said in a voice as smooth as syrup, "Sorry, we're closing soon." Except she hadn't turned away the 2 white families that arrived after them. That day, Denzel's father hadn't argued. He'd simply nodded, said, "Come on, son," and walked away. But Denzel had seen the tightness in his father's jaw, the way his fingers had curled into fists before relaxing again. And here he was now, decades later, living a life most could only dream of, yet still seeing the same thing play out. This time, he wasn't going to walk away. The phone buzzed again. A notification. He picked it up and saw the words that made his heart skip. Brooke Ellis uploaded a video. Lujardin just turned away Denzel Washington. You won't believe how they treated him. He tapped it. There it was, Victor's face, his smug tone, the dismissiveness in every syllable. The camera had caught it all, and now the world was seeing it too. He watched the view count climb. 10,000, 15,000, 30,000. Comments began flooding in, a tidal wave of outrage and disbelief. Is this for real? That's Denzel. Disgusting. I'm never going there again. This is why we still need to talk about discrimination. How dare they? Denzel locked the phone and set it aside. He didn't need to read more. The fire was already spreading. But this wouldn't be enough. A viral video might shame them for a day or two, but it wouldn't change anything. Not really. He wanted more than outrage. He wanted to make a point so sharp it would leave a scar. He started the engine and pulled out of the alley. The city lights blurred past as he drove, but his mind was clear, focused. He knew exactly what he needed to do. First thing tomorrow, he would remind the world, and Lujardin, that respect couldn't be bought or faked. It had to be lived. Morning broke crisp and bright over Los Angeles, sunlight piercing through the glass towers and palm trees like golden spears. The air felt different, charged somehow, as if the city itself sensed what was coming. At precisely 9:30, a black Escalade rolled up to the curb in front of Lujardin. Its windows were tinted so dark they reflected the restaurant's elegant facade, catching Victor's own smug expression as he adjusted his tie in the doorway. He didn't recognize the vehicle at first, but the way it idled, quiet yet powerful, made a few patrons pause mid-conversation as they sipped their morning lattes on the patio. The back door opened with a smooth hiss, and out stepped Denzel Washington. Gone were the ragged clothes and worn boots. Today, he wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that caught the light with a subtle sheen. The bow tie was perfect, the cufflinks discreet yet unmistakably expensive. His shoes gleamed like obsidian. Behind him came Angela Reyes, her sharp navy suit and leather portfolio exuding the authority of a seasoned attorney. Two cameramen flanked them, lenses already rolling as they followed Denzel up the steps. Victor blinked rapidly, his mouth suddenly dry. For a split second, he didn't move. Then he stepped forward, his lips stretching into a forced grin. "Mr. Washington," he exclaimed, his voice overly bright. "What an absolute honor to see you here today. Please come in. We'd be delighted to serve you." Denzel stopped at the top step and fixed him with a gaze so calm and so cold it froze Victor in place. "Funny," Denzel said softly. "Yesterday you didn't feel that way." Victor laughed nervously. "Ah, there must have been a misunderstanding. My staff didn't realize." Denzel raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Your staff realized exactly what they were doing," he said, his voice even. "You realized it too." Angela stepped forward and handed Victor a thick envelope. "Consider this your formal notice. My client is filing suit for discrimination and defamation. The footage has already been shared with our media contacts." Victor's face drained of color as he took the envelope with trembling fingers. The cameraman moved in closer. Across the street, passers-by began to gather, phones raised, whispers rippling through the crowd like electricity. "Mr. Washington, would you like to come inside?" Victor asked weakly, his tone almost pleading now. Denzel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you really think I want to eat here? After what I saw? After what I heard?" Victor opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Yesterday, you turned me away because you thought I was nobody," Denzel continued, his voice rising just enough for the growing crowd to hear. "But today, you want to open your doors because you realize who I am. That's not respect. That's cowardice." Gasps echoed among the onlookers. Someone started recording on Instagram Live. Denzel turned to Angela. "Let's go. We have somewhere better to be." As he descended the steps, the cameras followed. Victor called after him. "Mr. Washington, please. Surely we can come to an understanding." But Denzel didn't look back. He crossed the street to Rosie's diner, where Maria stood frozen in the doorway, her dish towel clutched in her hands. You're him," she stammered. Denzel smiled warmly. "I'm just a man looking for breakfast. Mind if I come in?" Maria stepped aside instantly. Of course. Inside the diner, the atmosphere was humble but welcoming. The scent of bacon and fresh coffee hung in the air, and the booths were filled with locals. Construction workers, young families, and a few older men who nodded in quiet recognition as Denzel entered. "Maria," he said, "I have a proposal for you." She blinked, confused. "A proposal?" Denzel nodded. "You care about people. That much was clear to me last night. How would you like $100,000 to fix this place up? Hire more staff. Give them bonuses. Turn this diner into a hub for the community." Maria's eyes widened. She covered her mouth with one hand. "You're serious?" she whispered. "Dead serious," Denzel said. The entire diner fell silent. Someone clapped softly, and soon others joined in. Within moments, the room erupted in applause. Across the street, Victor watched from the Lou Jardin patio, the humiliation plain on his face as his restaurant sat half-empty, patrons leaving one by one, muttering under their breath about boycotts and bad press. And the cameras never stopped rolling. By mid-afternoon, the video of Denzel's return to Le Jardin had spread like wildfire. Across every social media platform, from Instagram Reels to TikTok snippets, people were sharing the footage with captions like, "This is how you handle discrimination," and "Denzel Washington just taught everyone a masterclass in dignity." The original video of him being turned away had already garnered millions of views overnight. But now, with his dramatic comeback in a tuxedo and lawyers in tow, the narrative had exploded. At Le Jardin, the tension was palpable. Victor paced the lobby, clutching his phone, watching in horror as negative reviews piled up on Yelp and Google. "I'll never step foot in this place again. Disgusting behavior from management. Shame on you. Turning away Denzel Washington? Are you insane?" His assistant Carly stood awkwardly by the host's stand, nervously refreshing their Instagram page. Every post was flooded with angry comments. "You need to do something," Carly whispered. "People are canceling their reservations. I've had 5 calls in the last hour." Victor slammed his phone down on the marble counter. "This will blow over," he said, his voice tight. "It's just social media outrage. These things never last." But even as he spoke, he didn't sound convinced. Across the street at Rosie's diner, the mood couldn't have been more different. Maria stood behind the counter, staring at her phone in shock as notifications rolled in faster than she could read them. "Maria, we're on the news," one of her cooks shouted from the kitchen. She looked up to see her diner featured on the local station's afternoon broadcast. The reporter stood outside Rosie's, explaining how Denzel Washington had pledged a 6-figure donation to revitalize the humble eatery and turn it into a community hub. Customers began trickling in, some curious, others holding their phones up to take photos of the now famous diner. "Are you really the lady Denzel helped?" one young woman asked, wide-eyed. Maria smiled shyly. "That's me, I guess." She glanced toward the corner booth where Denzel now sat with Angela and her legal team. Papers and laptops cluttered the table as they quietly strategized. "We'll start with the discrimination suit," Angela said. "But we should also consider a public statement. Do you want to address the media directly?" Denzel shook his head. "Not yet. Let the story breathe. Right now, people are watching for the right reasons. This isn't about me. It's about sending a message." At another booth, a group of veterans sat sipping coffee, watching him intently. One of them, a gray-haired man with a cane, leaned over and whispered, "He's doing something none of us could." Back at Le Jardin, the cracks were beginning to show. Several servers had walked out, unwilling to face the angry patrons demanding answers. Victor fielded another call from the restaurant's owner, his face growing paler by the minute. "Victor, do you have any idea what you've done?" The voice thundered through the phone. "We're being slaughtered online. Celebrities are tweeting about this. If we don't do damage control immediately, we're finished." Victor swallowed hard. "We can issue an apology. It's too late for apologies. Fix this, or pack your things." But even as Victor hung up, he knew the damage was irreversible. Across the city, people boycotted Le Jardin, canceling their plans and sharing screenshots of their cancellation confirmations with hashtags like #RespectEveryone and #BoycottLeJardin. Meanwhile, Rosie's diner was trending. News outlets camped outside, eager to capture every detail of its transformation. Maria's staff couldn't keep up with the influx of customers. Lines stretched out the door as people clamored for a seat in the place Denzel Washington had chosen to uplift. Inside the diner, Denzel finally stood, gathering his team. The time for quiet reflection was over. "Let's get to work," he said softly. Maria watched him leave the booth and felt tears prick her eyes. He wasn't just changing her diner. He was changing lives. 2 weeks later, Rosie's diner looked nothing like the tired, fading little spot it had been. Where once the neon sign had sputtered weakly, a new one now shone brightly, its letters in bold vintage script, "Second Chances Cafe." The cracked booths had been reupholstered in rich leatherette, the floors polished until they gleamed. Fresh paint coated the walls in warm earth tones, and sunlight poured through the spotless windows. Maria stood just inside the door, hands clasped over her apron, eyes wide with disbelief. This can't be real," she whispered. But it was. Denzel Washington was seated at the counter, sleeves rolled up as he sipped a mug of coffee and reviewed the plans for the cafe's grand reopening. Around him, contractors hustled to put finishing touches on the decor while Maria's newly expanded staff trained with smiles and an eagerness that hadn't been there before. "You deserve this," Denzel said, setting his coffee down. You've been feeding this community for years, even when you didn't have much to give. Now it's time for this place to reflect the heart behind it. Maria turned to him, her voice breaking slightly. You don't know what this means to us. To me. I was drowning in debt before you walked through my door. I was thinking about closing down. You're not closing anything, Denzel replied. You're just getting started. In the corner, a young man named Marcus wiped down tables carefully. He was a veteran in his late 20s, recently hired thanks to Denzel's donation. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves but from the lingering effects of PTSD. You're doing great, Marcus, Denzel said as he passed. Marcus looked up, startled, then smiled. Thanks, Mr. Washington. Feels good to have a place to belong. That's the idea, Denzel said quietly. Across the street, Le Jardin sat in eerie silence. The once bustling restaurant was nearly empty. Its windows were smudged, the outdoor patio deserted. A single car idled at the curb as Victor stood out front, talking frantically on his phone. I don't care what it takes. Hire a PR firm, run damage control, offer discounts, just fix this. Victor hissed into the receiver. But it was too late. The cafe's grand opening had been plastered all over the news. Local channels, national networks, even international outlets had picked up the story. Denzel Washington transforms small diner into community haven after being denied service across the street. By the afternoon of the reopening, a line stretched around the block. People came from all over, not just to eat but to support what the cafe represented. Inside, Maria wiped tears from her eyes as the first customers flooded in. A mother with 2 children, an elderly couple holding hands, a group of construction workers still in dusty boots. Welcome to Second Chances, Maria said with a beaming smile. The cameras followed Denzel as he stood to address the crowd. When I came in here that night, I was just looking for a cup of coffee, he began. What I found was kindness. That kindness deserves to be multiplied. This isn't just a cafe. It's a reminder that everyone deserves dignity.
No exceptions.
Applause thundered through the room. Maria's staff stood a little taller. Marcus wiped at his eyes before stepping behind the counter to take his first order of the day. Denzel stepped back, letting Maria bask in the attention. This wasn't about him anymore. It never had been. As the day wore on, more news crews arrived, interviewing customers, filming the lines, and capturing the laughter and warmth inside the cafe. Across the street, Victor watched from Le Jardin's darkened windows. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Angry emails from the restaurant's owners, messages from furious former customers, and endless social media tags shaming his actions. His empire was crumbling while Rosie's Cafe, Second Chances, thrived. And there wasn't a thing he could do about it.